Hey guys, it's Cass. Welcome back to my channel. We have a bit of a sun and dust situation happening here, and also a siren situation, I guess. Anyways, thank you for tuning in. Today is Leap Day, February 29th, the last day of February, and I am here with my February wrap-up. This was kind of a weird reading month for me. I felt like it was a very uneven pace. I did have a DNF in the beginning of the month that I think kind of maybe threw me off a little bit for the first part of February. But yeah, I felt like I either was like not finishing any books at all, or I was finishing like 4 at the same time. So it was kind of strange, but I think it ended up being a pretty solid month looking at the stack of books that I have here. I feel like I also had a lot of interesting, like, connected themes throughout the books that I was reading. There was a lot of like family focused stuff in the books that I'm going to talk about. Lots of stuff about motherhood and creating art and writing while being a mother. Also a lot of grappling with aging in these books as well. So yeah, I kind of liked that I could identify some themes and some threads throughout all of these. I read 9 books this month with 1 DNF, and that came out to 2,184 pages according to Storygraph. I don't count my DNFs as part of that 9, so yeah, it's like a separate thing for me. But my split between fiction and nonfiction this month was 33% fiction and 67% nonfiction, which I'd have to like look back through Storygraph, but I feel like that's a record for me. I didn't realize that so many of the books that I read this month were nonfiction, so that was exciting. I feel like I really found kind of my groove and just found the kind of nonfiction that I enjoy reading, so it's fun to just devour those books. Let's start off with my DNF, which was Lies and Sorcery by Elsa Morante. Me and Renee from So I Read This Book were planning on doing a buddy read of this, and we started it. I still have my bookmark in here. I got to page 108. I'm not sure how far in Renee got, but we both were just feeling like it was not the right time for this book. It is a chunky, like 800 pages, and we were like, all right, like we'll read 30 pages of it a day and we'll be done with it before February is over. And those 30 pages a day ended up being very dense and just too much to get through. Like, I know I personally felt like it was interfering with me being able to read like another book alongside it. And yeah, it just was too much to tackle and wasn't the right time. I will read you the synopsis. I didn't get very far into it. So the story is set in Sicily and told by Elsa, orphaned young and raised by a fallen woman. For years, Elsa has lived in an imaginary world of her own. Now, however, her guardian has died, and the young woman feels that she must abandon her fantasy life to confront the truth of her family's tortured and dramatic history. Elsa is a seductive, if less than reliable, spinner of stories, and the reader is drawn into a tale of secrets, intrigue, and treachery, which, as it proceeds, is increasingly revealed to be an exploration of a legacy of political and social injustice. So yes, this is a very sweeping novel. I know as far in as I got, she was really giving us a lot of details about her family, her parents, her grandparents, and I think that I wanted it to be more so about Elsa herself than all of this like history. But yeah, I'm soft DNFing this, so putting it back on the shelf. I hope to return to it eventually because I was really excited for it whenever I bought it, but I was just not in the mindset to tackle this at the moment. So yeah. My first finished piece of the month was The Laugh of the Medusa by Hélène Cixous. And shout out to the French pronunciation videos on YouTube because they really carry me throughout these videos.
So in French in France, it's said as Hélène
And this was a really interesting piece. I think it was about like 20 pages or so, but it took me an afternoon to get through, and I ended up watching a bunch of like video essays on YouTube after I finished it, just trying to put the pieces together and deepen my understanding of it. I've read one of her books before, Letters from Manhattan, I believe it was called. I read it back in like August of 2023, and I did not understand that at all. And yeah, I find her writing very intriguing, but I feel like I have not fully grasped any of it yet. The video essays definitely helped, but I'm not at a point where I feel like I can just like go into her work and fully pick up what she's putting down. So I do think that I would benefit from a reread of this, and I will leave it linked below. I just logged in with my like library card information. I think that it was on like some sort of educational website, and it let me access it, so I didn't have to pay or anything. I'm really interested in her work because of the online store Wombhouse Books. I believe the owner's name is Jessica, and she is always posting about Ellen Sixu's work, so that just like has my interest peaked. I will keep trying with her work though. The first book that I finished was Beloved by Toni Morrison. You guys, I'm so glad that I picked this up. I have not read any Toni Morrison since March of last year, so it's been almost a full year, and I'm really like grappling with how to space out authors that I really enjoy, especially ones that have passed, because I only have so much of their work to get through. And obviously, you know, you can reread works and stuff, but I'm not a huge rereader yet. So yeah, I'm just trying to figure out like what is the best time frame. I don't want to like read, you know, all of her books or all of another author's books at once and then not have any left, but I also don't want to wait a year in between reading her books. And we're getting so much, oh my god, so much glare. I gave this 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. I woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning before work the one morning in order to finish this. And that's big because I am usually not conscious until about 6:45 a.m. And you don't need me to tell you this, but Toni is writing her ass off in this book. I mean, this is another book that would definitely benefit from a reread. There's definitely things that I missed, and I feel like her work is just so rich, and you can just get so much out of it with every read. This book is about Setha. She's a former slave who is now free, who lives with her daughter Denver. They have a pretty secluded life at home. There were some events that occurred that kind of estranged them from the community of freed slaves in Cincinnati, where the book takes place. So yeah, it follows Setha and Denver, as well as Paul D, who had been a slave with Setha, and he ends up kind of coming back into their lives. They are being haunted by the ghost of Beloved, and this book just rightfully does not shy away from the horrors of slavery. It's obviously very well researched and just so raw and realistic. There's some really gruesome events in this book, but the way that Toni Morrison kind of reveals those events is so skillful. She is so good at building up the details and kind of circling around these situations and revealing a bit more each time, which really propels the book forward, and I think is such an interesting representation of memory and the passing of time and the ways that trauma affect us. Even though I think it's been like 18 years since Setha escaped from slavery, the things that happened to her are obviously still affecting her. And I feel like it really just asks the question of, can we ever truly escape our past, even if we think that we've attained some sort of distance from it, whether that's physically or just through the passage of time? You know, there are still these ghosts and things that haunt us years and years and years later. I also think that Toni is just so skilled at creating imagery and characters that stick with you. I feel this way about her previous books that I've read too, being Sula and Song of Solomon. There are things from those books, even though it's been a year and a half since I read both of those, that have just stuck in my brain. And it's the same thing with this, you know, a month out, and I'm sure years out, I'm gonna remember parts of this. There's a really distinct sense of time and place, in addition to the characters being really well thought out and having, you know, personalities and voices of their own. They really just, I feel like, come off the page. I highly recommend this. If you haven't read Morrison yet, please do. She's not as intimidating as everyone thinks that she is. I really enjoyed this. I think Sula is also a really good starting point if you're looking to get into her. So yeah, 5 stars. Next, I read a digital galley of No Judgment by by Lauren Oyler, which is an essay collection out by Harper One on March 19th of this year. I rated this 3.75 stars. You guys know I love an essay collection, and I feel like this was a really solid one. I haven't read any of Lauren Oyler's other work. I know Jalen is a huge fan of her novel Fake Accounts, and I'm interested in reading that now that I have read this essay collection. My favorite essays in the collection were My Perfect Opinions, I Am the One Who Is Sitting Here for Hours and Hours and Hours, and My Anxiety. Lauren is exploring a bunch of different topics in this essay collection. There's one about gossip, one about Goodreads, one about her time living in Berlin, one about autofiction, one about vulnerability, and then one about her mental illness and her anxiety. These are kind of longer essays than what I'm used to. There's only, I think, 7 in the book, and yeah, she really like deep dives into these topics. She also cites a lot of different books and articles and things, and really made my list of things to check out a lot longer. I thought that it was a really good mix of kind of her personal experiences and then more of that like researched aspect and bringing in, you know, other people's experiences and other works that she's read. I think that her anecdotes and examples were all used in a really entertaining and intriguing way, and she really made me interested in doing some further reading, which I feel like is sometimes kind of a hit and miss thing for me, where sometimes, like in this case, I'll be really interested in, you know, reading the articles or the books that are mentioned, and then sometimes not so much. But yeah, I found a lot of really interesting like articles and essays to check out because of this. I think that this was a really realistic look at the topics that are being discussed. She's really good at unpacking the opposing viewpoints of whatever argument she's making, and while she's really strong in her opinions, she is able to kind of make some conceits where necessary, where she might have some biases or something like that. And yeah, I thought that this was funny. It does verge on kind of millennial humor sometimes, but I think that she's really self-aware about it. I think that the humor was a really nice touch because it kind of brought more of a conversational tone to some of the pieces, which was really welcome for me. My kind of issue with this collection was that I felt like it was a little bit overwritten at times. You know, I also love a dash and a semicolon and parentheses, but sometimes that kind of structure just felt a bit too overused for me, and it made it a bit difficult to follow her train of thought sometimes. So I welcomed the moments where she kind of stepped out of that and was just funny and straightforward. So yeah, thank you to NetGalley and Harper One for providing me with a galley for that. The next book that I read was Daughter by Claudia Day. I rated this 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed it. This is a really sparse yet somehow like deep dive at the same time into toxic family relationships and the power dynamics within them. This is about Mona, who is a playwright and an actress, and she's had a really fraught, kind of hot and cold, off and on relationship with her father, who's named Paul. He is an author who is very successful, but has kind of lost his touch. He hasn't published anything in a while. Mona and Paul are only close when Paul is kind of in turmoil with Mona's stepmother and her half-sister. So yeah, he had left Mona's mother when Mona was, I want to say like 10, I think. And yeah, things just kind of really unravel because Paul loves an affair. And whenever Mona's stepmother and half-sister find out about this, they kind of use Mona as the scapegoat because she was Paul's confidant and she knew about the affair, but she did not tell her stepmother Cherry and her half-sister Eva. And yeah, it just really breaks the bonds of the entire family. We also get a look at Mona's relationship with her husband, her mom, her sister, and her best friend. And there's some really poignant scenes about rape, depression, and pregnancy in here that I thought were really well done. I think Claudia Day does a really good job at kind of submerging the reader in the gaslighting, the lies, the confusion that kind of cloud Mona's relationships and kind of taint them. She really is pitting you as the reader against certain characters in this book, which is exactly what Paul is doing within the book. He's pitting his family members against each other, basically, in order to kind of keep his power. I was a really big fan of the sparse prose in this book. Of course, that's one of my favorite things in a book, but I feel like you were still really able to feel the emotional impact of what Mona was going through. She goes through some heavy stuff in this book, and it's not necessarily glossed over or anything like that, but it's very straightforward. I also really like the way that Claudia Day was maneuvering through time in this book. She really effortlessly weaves past and present together in here, and I think that it is super effective in fleshing out the relationship and the history between all of the characters. It really just kind of builds things up more than we would have gotten just staying in like the present day. I also really liked the aspect of Paul and Mona both being writers and the way that their careers were kind of juxtaposed against each other. You know, Paul is kind of in his later years of his career. He's not publishing, he's not feeling super successful, and Mona is kind of breaking out into the like writing and acting scene. And I think that it added an extra sort of tension to their relationship. And there were a lot of parallels between the events of the novel itself with the things that the characters were writing within the book. I don't think that enough people are talking about this one. This was really giving the same vibes to me as like Tides by Sarah Freeman, if anyone has read that. I read that last year and really enjoyed it. But yeah, I think that this one is an underrated gem. Next, I read The Pumpkin Eater by Penelope Mortimer. I rated this 3.75 stars. This is a mid-century account of a woman's emotional collapse. She's grappling with all of the things that I love to read about: marriage, motherhood, mental illness. We have an unnamed narrator in here, and she has been married and divorced multiple times. She has, I don't even know how many children from those past marriages and her current marriage, but there are a lot of children. She is also pregnant with another child that her current husband does not want because he is having an affair. So hate that for her. That kind of pregnancy and affair situation is really what sends the narrator on like a downward spiral and just really takes a toll on her mental health. The introduction of this book says that it was really closely based on Penelope Mortimer's own life, and it says that it seems like it was a really cathartic writing experience, and I definitely got that from this book. This was a pretty quick read. I found it interesting because it feels very ahead of its time. I think that this was written in the 50s or the 60s. I feel like this was written like right before people really started talking about the toll of motherhood and failing marriages and just the effects that those had on women at the time. It really feels kind of like a blueprint to some more contemporary books, especially kind of to one that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. It really digs into those themes that I mentioned earlier. So if you're into those, I recommend this. I think that it was really interesting the way that the breakdown of this main character was juxtaposed against the wealth of the family and this kind of perfect image that they present to the world. It also talks a lot about abortion and women's autonomy and kind of the right to choose, you know, what happens to your body, which once again, I don't think was really in the conversation at the point in time when this was written. This was really dialogue heavy, but I think the conversations were done well. I think they were witty and ironic and funny. So yeah, this was not my favorite thing ever, but I enjoyed it. I would read more from Penelope Mortimer. Next up, we have The Young Man by Annie Ernaux. I rated this 3 stars. Annie Ernaux is one of my favorite writers, but this is so incredibly tiny, like to the extent that they had to include a multiple page biography of Ernaux in the back of this book in order to like beef it up. It's so funny, like I knew it was gonna be short obviously, but the actual work begins on like page 13 and it goes until page like 40 something, and then it's like a bunch of pictures of Annie and her biography. So yeah, the actual like the young man content in here is very slim. Despite its very short length though, I feel like she did bring up a lot of interesting themes in here that I would have loved to see her explore a bit deeper. She is reliving her youth while also kind of reckoning with getting older. She is in a relationship with a man who is 30 years younger than her in this book, and I think the way that she plays around with time and memory is really interesting in this. Her memories of things that she did with men in the past start kind of flooding back in whenever she's going to certain places and doing certain things with this younger man. And it's like a lot of these things that she did happened before this guy was even born. So yeah, her memories start mixing with her present day situation, and I think it's interesting because the young man is kind of almost interchangeable with all of the other men that Ernaux has been with in her life. They're doing the same things, they're going to the same places. The main thing there is just the age difference between them. And that age difference kind of brings up the power dynamics that are in play. Not only do they have an age difference, but there's also kind of a difference in class. Annie is a lot wealthier than this man who is a student, and you know, he's young, he's in school, he's figuring things out. So she has some interesting kind of thoughts here of wielding her financial power over him in a way, and she was kind of into that, which was interesting. Yeah, I feel like this is kind of criticizing this like double standard of older men being with younger women, which I don't think is as widely accepted of a thing nowadays. But the people around them, I think, try to make her feel a lot of shame for being older, and she does her best to not give into that, but she does have her moments of jealousy. And I think it's not even like jealousy of like, oh, he's gonna leave me for a younger woman. I think it's more maybe jealousy of his youth in a way, if that makes sense. I would definitely recommend reading this after you read Happening by Annie Ernaux. There's a lot of references to the abortion that she had, which is what Happening was about, and her writing that book was actually kind of the catalyst for her ending up leaving this younger man. She kind of realizes that time has passed and there's just a lot of differences of where they are in their lives, so that kind of triggers her to leave him. So yeah, I really enjoyed the prose in this book, as always, because I love Ernaux's writing, but I just feel like I needed a little bit more from it, even though I feel like I did get a lot of ideas and things to think about from it. It just wasn't long enough for me. Especially since it's like sold and marketed as like a book, you know? Next is Daybook, The Journal of an Artist by Truitt. I rated this 3 stars. This to me is giving Journal of a Solitude by May Sarton, but for visual artists instead of writers. Anne was a sculptor and a painter, and she kept this journal over, I think, like 7 years, and it talks a lot about her career progression, her aging and getting older as a woman in her 50s, her family life, and just like her artistic process and certain like insidery things in the art world. There's a lot of talk about her like exhibiting at galleries and stuff, which I thought was interesting. I don't read about that very often. I enjoyed this book a lot more in the second half of it. She turns the focus a lot more to her children, who are all growing up and becoming adults with their own lives and even their own families. And she is really kind of struggling to separate her identity as a mother from her identity as an artist. She kind of talks about having 2 different selves, the self of the mother and the self of the artist. She is kind of contemplating the second birth of her children into adulthood, which I thought was super interesting because I think a lot of the books that I read and a lot of the books that are kind of popular in this space are from the perspective of young women who are contemplating whether or not they even want to have children. A lot of them are not from the perspective of a woman in her late 50s who has 3 kids who are, you know, grown up and leaving home to start their own lives. So I thought that that was really just fresh and gave me a lot to think about too. She's talking about her own daughters becoming mothers, and it kind of just made me like reflect on my own family's dynamics, like as me and my sister get older and, you know, start our lives as adults. It brought something new to the table for me in that sense, so I really liked that. She is also really great at kind of weaving together the past and the present. She reflects a lot on her own childhood and just different episodes from her past, but she also looks forward to the future. She's really frank about her financial situation and the anxieties that she has around it, and just the fact that she has to create and sell her art in order to support her family, which is like comforting to know that it was also a struggle for her, but it also kind of sucks that, you know, even though she was a relatively like successful exhibiting artist, she still had those struggles too. I feel like the main reason why this didn't fully work for me was just my own state of mind and just my reading experience of it. I was just having a really tough time focusing in on it and honestly just staying awake, which is not a read or a drag of this book. It was just my mode of being during the time that I was reading this. It wasn't because it was like bad or anything. I did though also kind of struggle with this occasionally from like a sentence structure standpoint, if you will. I just had a tough time sometimes following her train of thought, and I found myself rereading sentences and being like, what is she trying to say here? Like, I felt like grammatically they just didn't make sense to me. So yeah, that was this. I think if you're an art lover, this would probably be interesting for you. Just don't fall asleep 20 pages in every time you pick it up like I did. I also read Alien Daughters Walk into the Sun, an Almanac of Extreme Girlhood by Jackie Wang. This was what I'm calling my lunch break book for this month. I toted this back and forth to work almost every single day in February. The pieces in this are really short, so I would just read like a couple on my lunch break every day, and it was just a nice little like escape from work. It just gave me some little like tidbits to think about in the middle of the day. So that was my experience with this. took me like the entire month to finish it. But it is a collection of Jackie's blog posts, interviews that she's done with different publications, essays, parts of zines that she created, poetry. It has a little bit of everything in it, which is fun. And it spans from 2006, which was the beginning of her undergrad, all the way through 2016 when she was getting her PhD in African and African American Studies at Harvard. And it is super feminist and like radical. It has kind of a punk bent to it. She talks a lot about her travels. She would like bike around the country and go and visit different places and people. Talks about her relationships. She's a queer woman, and it explores that as well as her depression and mental illness. Another big theme here is her brother who was imprisoned and the way that that kind of affected her politics and just her mindset. And it also talks a lot about art and books and films that shaped her as a person. So this was really reminiscent for me of like Tumblr. A lot of the pieces are from her Tumblr blog, and it was giving that vibe. It also reminded me of like Rookie Mag, if you guys were into that. I know I was as a teenager, but it had a bit more of like an edge to it. I do think that they actually mentioned Rookie in this. I think one of the like interview questions that she was asked mentioned it, which I thought was fun because it definitely gave me the same vibe. I think some of the pieces in here did go over my head. I wouldn't say that this book is like as accessible as Rookie was, but I think it has a lot of similar themes. I really appreciated the moments where she was just recounting different emotions and situations in just like a raw and real way. I think the main reason why I enjoyed this was because of the like structure and the format of it. It's in chronological order throughout those 10 years, and she has it split up into like 3 or 4 different sections, and at the beginning of each section she kind of gives you an overview and an explanation of where she was in her life at that time. It was just really cool to see the different ideas that she had developed and the different themes and images that kept popping up throughout the years in this book. You could kind of tell the things that she got stuck on and kept trying to unravel through her writing. The main thing for me with this was just the way that it created a portrait of who she was at each point in time. It shows you the ways that she changed throughout the years, the way that she stayed the same, and she just has so much like respect and reverence for her past self, which I really appreciate. There's a quote from the introduction where she says, she's talking about the process of like compiling all of these and whether or not she went back and kind of edited them. And she says, "The truth is, I cannot fully disavow these writings because although many of the pieces are aesthetically green, I respect the person I used to be, fearless, open to the world, guileless, and practiced in the art of living." So yeah, I connected with the form and the overall ideas of this work more than the actual content at times, but it still gave me some really interesting ideas about girlhood and feminism and queerness to think about. So this was an interesting one. My final book for the month that I just finished yesterday was Splinters by Leslie Jamison. I gave this 5 stars. This book, I don't have a ton of notes written down about it because I like just finished it. This book just has everything that I love in a book. It's a memoir, and it's talking about her relationship and marriage to a fellow writer that ends up in divorce. It is exploring mother-daughter relationships, both between Leslie and her mom and Leslie and her daughter, and it is talking about balancing single parenting after the divorce with Leslie's work as a writer and a teacher. You know, she's going on book tours, she's doing different speaking events, she's traveling, she's taking her daughter with her, she's doing it all. And that's catnip to me. That's exactly the kind of writing that I love. If you're interested in this, but you're maybe unsure of if you want to pick it up or not, I would definitely check out her essay in the New Yorker. It's called The Birth of My Daughter, The Death of My Marriage, and it is kind of this book distilled into an essay. I think if you enjoy that, you'll really like this as a whole. I know that I read that on my lunch break at work and then literally, I think, bought the book that weekend because I loved it so much. So yeah, I'll leave a link to that below so you guys can check it out. One of the things that I thought was really interesting about this is how much Leslie reflects on her parents' relationship. They had also gotten divorced, and then they ended up kind of actually growing into like a friendship, which is super in contrast with Leslie and her ex-husband, who do not speak to each other. Like, there's absolutely no contact between them besides dropping their daughter off because they have shared custody of her. I think that the relationship between Leslie and her mom is super interesting, and you kind of see how close that they were because of the divorce that her parents went through, and you see her kind of project that closeness and want that closeness for herself and her own daughter, which is sweet, but also you can kind of see the unhealthiness of it because she really ends up pushing her husband away because of that, and it just really clouds their relationship. But I do think that she was really fair to her ex-husband in this. You can kind of see that she's grappling with feeling guilty about the hurt that she caused him. She knows that she caused hurt too. She's not blaming him for everything, but she's trying to kind of reconcile that with, you know, her need to leave the relationship, and she kind of gets into the reasons why she needed to leave without disparaging him in any way. I think she really does place blame on both of them. So yeah, I think this was just so honest and realistic. I saw a review on Goodreads that was a bit frustrated with her getting back on the dating scene and kind of falling into some of the patterns that are not so healthy for her. But I think that that's just life, and I think people can just be wired certain ways sometimes, and you can really see her, even though she trips up sometimes, she's making an effort to kind of break the thought patterns and the behaviors that are not so good in her relationships. I think it makes sense that, you know, she didn't suddenly become this like perfect person with perfect relationships. It's just how life is. There is talk about alcoholism and like addiction in here, which is what a lot of her other work talks about as well. This does have some pandemic talk in it. I know some people are not a fan of reading about the pandemic and like quarantine and stuff in books, but it happened. It was a part of life, and this is a memoir that is talking about that time. So I didn't mind it personally, but just something to be aware of if you're not into that. I did it. I'm done. All right. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Let me know what your favorite book that you read in February was. Let me know if there's anything that you think that I should check out in March. And yeah, thank you for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one.